Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at Truckin number 1 and number 2. This is kind of a one-man anthology underground from George Metzger from 1972 and 1973. These are, the subtitle here is No More Urban Blues on the first issue, and a lot of these comics are basically extolling the virtues of going back to the land, communal living. George Metzger really seemed to be into that lifestyle. But then also conversely, George Metzger really loved science fiction. He actually came up as an artist working for the sci-fi / comic book fanzines of the late 60s, early 70s. Some of those were very slick. Prozines, they called them. That's where like Bernie Wrightson had his first stuff published, Jeff Jones, Mike Kaluta, and guys like George Metzger. So when Underground Comics came around, he was all ready to go. And he was in tons of undergrounds over the years. And eventually got his own title. He had a bunch of other titles too, but they were all mostly sci-fi stuff. And this is has a little sci-fi in it, but it's very much a hippie comic. Cover here by Metzger. Excuse me. And not so engaging. Inside front cover here, we see a camera zooming in on planet Earth, going through the clouds, zooming into this cabin, through the window, and we see a drawing table with the first page of this comic that we're about to read. So I guess this is George Metzger's studio. Kind of a nice way to start a comic. The first story is called Autumn. I'm going to assume the narrator in all of this is George Metzger. They're pretty much all autobio. And he's talking about going to Canada. And he hooks up with this commune. Just shows a couple pages of just what it's like living on a commune. Building a chicken coop. Getting ready for winter. Thanksgiving comes, they have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And then he drives off. So a lot of stories are like that. They're just vignettes. And, but it's kind of nice just to, it's like a time portal. You know, I don't know much about what it was like living on a commune. I was 2 years old back then, or 4 or something. Idaho hippie house building comics. And we see this guy, he's building a nice house out in the forest. And this guy shows up and says, you don't have any plans? Where are your plans? And the guy says, I don't need any plans. It's all in my head. And then there's a pretty subtle gag here. They're taking a break in this bottle of wine. We see the surface is completely tilted because the house is, it looks fine, but without plans, you run the risk of everything not being level, on a tilt. Next one's called Lest Darkness Fall. We see all these monsters and demons congregating. Pretty nice page. And we see this head demon kind of saying, brothers, the time has come. And they all fly off. And they fly to the city, and they find a house. And they go inside this bedroom where there's a little baby in a crib. And they're all peering in, and the baby wakes up right then. And of course, he's just like, ah! This crib is surrounded by a legion of monsters. And then it turns out it's all a nightmare. We see this guy wake up in his van. It's probably George Metzger. And he's saying, man, that's what I get for reading those scary comics before going to bed. And we see all these horror undergrounds. Skull. And he basically vows that maybe he should draw more positive stuff. Stop drawing negative stuff. And he says, serves me right if the monsters got me. Thank God it was only a dream. And as he's driving up, as he goes back to sleep, we see all these monsters creeping up on his van. A short trip about hitchhiking. And this is another one of those comics. It's just a bunch of little vignettes, just talking about how cool it is hitchhiking, tramping around America. Seems like it was a lot nicer to hitchhike back then. He seems to meet a lot of nice people. People like give him food and, are lonely, want to chat. Meets a lot of interesting people. And he says the best part about it, though, is you eventually end up with friends. And you can have some good times. But the last panel, the road is calling him once again, and he's back on the road, hitching around. This next one's called Interlude, and this is kind of in a post-apocalyptic world. We see this kind of weird architecture for this little building here. Last chance for water, so it doesn't look like the Earth's doing too good. This guy on this motorcycle, I guess he's passing through, heading to California. And at this point, like, a lot of people think California's just a myth. The guy who runs the water station is just like, I didn't even think that was a real place. It's like, no, it is. I've been there. So he heads out. Then this other group of people show up in their vehicle to the water station, but we never see them again. I don't really understand why they use half a page to introduce these people. He drives through this thing called Laser Pass, which is like a niche, man-made niche made in the mountains. It's to make it quicker to get to California. Really like this sequence of panels here, especially this one with the rain falling on them. That's some really nice stuff. So he makes it through the chasm, and he finds himself at the southern pit. I think that's where a big chunk of California fell into the sea or something. He sees all these people congregating. I think George Metzger must have been a gearhead. Even though he loves nature and communal living and getting back to the land, he also seems to really love designing these vehicles, and buildings that seem like they could work. Like, he actually thinks it through. I think these are all like steam driven, I imagine. But they look like little choo-choo trains, a lot of them. But each one is very distinct. He meets this old man, and the old man's telling him about how, there used to be a big city down there. Millions of people lived all together, The vehicles all take off. They're going south for the mushroom harvest. And the old man disappears. It's like he was a ghost. And then the guy heads off. He does sign it. At the very end, it says "Endish." So maybe this was supposed to continue, and those people from the watering station, we were supposed to meet again. I don't know. But kind of interesting, but really nothing happens at all. Instant California log cabin. I don't know if this was a thing back then, but maybe there were these giant canisters which would have all the logs that you'd need for a log cabin and the directions. I don't know if that was a thing, but he gives us the poor people's house hints. Just live in the container. So if they send you this big container, just make a few windows in it, a few additions, and you got yourself a nice little mini house. Once again, he really designed this mini house. He could have just drawn some crappy thing, but it seems like George Metzger definitely has that part of his brain where he really kind of like is that the left side that's more like technological and good at engineering and stuff like that. He has lots of these really nice landscapes. This one's called Ocean. So I guess George Metzger, whenever he goes to the West Coast, makes a point to get to the ocean as quick as he can. Feels a real connection to it. Once again, I'm assuming this is George Metzger. I guess the cliffs are collapsing. And then George Metzger has this total just musings about the ocean from when time began. We see these dinosaurs, volcanoes are going off. Shows that it looks like Atlantis, this ancient city swallowed up by the ocean. But then we cut forward to today, and we see man polluting the ocean, spewing shit into it. He wonders, what will the life touch? What will the sea touch? Shall it lap upon a dead land or embrace a new? So, we've got a choice. He says, it's up to us. we could just become this fucking dead civilization, or we could get our shit together and figure out a way to live a sustainable life with nature. This next one's called Urban Blues. And they're just talking about just how most of us now live in cities. All cramped up, seduced by television. We see all this consumerism going on. Lots of greediness. Kind of like all these crazy word balloons smushed together. Talks about how some people can't take it, they go crazy. Some people mellow out. But then a lot of people choose to just remove themselves physically from the city and get back to the land. And we see this nice little commune. And he reiterates the question and wonders, basically says, what is to be comes by what we do now. So definitely very ecologically minded, George Metzger. This one's called Day's End. And once again, out in the desert, we see all these vehicles congregate. It's kind of a gathering. Everyone's cooking. It's almost like a hippie tailgate party, But they're all there just to see the sunset. This beautiful sunset over the canyon. And then night comes. I really like this page. Just the scenes of night. The light and darkness playing up against each other. It's a striking page. And basically the hippies just have a nice little get-together. Communing with nature. And the back cover continues it. And we see them all around the fire. Pretty nice back cover. Okay, let's get to Truckin number 2. Subtitle, Energized Comics. I don't know why it's called that. I really like this cover. It's more cartoony. The way this car is like bouncing off the road. Very appealing cover. So this first story, we see this van. It's like an old-timey van. And they have a bed set up in the back. And this guy is sleeping. I like these two panels a lot. The sun rising. Once again, we see some strange vehicle. So maybe this takes place in the same post-apocalyptic world as the second. As what we saw in the first issue. And then they come upon the circus. It looks like Buffalo Bill Cody's there. I think this is part of the dream, though. But that's it. Once again, just a little vignette. This one's called Treasure Trove, a True Life Adventure. And we see these communal hippies. They're heading to the dump. They're getting rid of a bunch of junk. So they load up their truck and they drive out there. But then when they get to the dump, they keep finding all this cool shit. So the gag is that they actually come back with just as much as they left. And this woman's like, I thought you guys went to the dump. It's like, we did. Look at all the cool shit we found. This one is co-credited to Inwood. I didn't look it up. I don't know who that is. I assume he wrote it. But then again, this art does look a little different. So maybe Inwood and Metzger collaborated on the art. This next one's about Sasquatch. Just a little thing about what we know about Sasquatch. All the legends. Apparently Sasquatches are very good at throwing rocks. So be careful. Don't approach a Sasquatch cave unless you have a helmet on. Talking about how Sasquatch don't like to be around people. They usually live alone. They apparently like to stack rocks. I mean, this is all made up, of course. There's no such thing as a Sasquatch. Sorry to tell you. And he also, at the end, the narrator wonders how Sasquatch will survive in this modern world. Will he survive? Will he survive civilization? This next story has a little prologue. We see Icarus flying too close to the sun. For a long time, man has been interested in flight. Once the Industrial Revolution came around, we could make airplanes. Now we have jet planes. But will this continue? What is the future of flight? And this one's called airships. So we see a little history of the first dirigibles and airships and hot air balloons, and the reason why they went out of favor. It was a very popular mode of transport for a little while, but because of the Hindenburg explosion, people didn't trust them anymore. During World War II, they were too slow, too bulky. They were easy prey for the airplanes. So there's basically no need for blimps anymore. But he surmises that maybe in the near future, with rising shipping costs in the commercial sector, maybe it might be a good idea to go back. Oops, I skipped a page. And there could be these huge cargo airships. And then he even goes further and says, yeah, maybe we'll come up with anti-gravity one day. And then we'll really be set, you know? So kind of interesting, he just like does these little, I don't know, this is almost like an article that would be in a magazine, but he illustrates it. So there's a flip book, so let's flip around. A Truckin supplement, Ice Age comics. Really like this cover. Love that logo. It's well drawn, nice stuff. So we have a little prologue here. I spent the winter past in a cabin by a quiet river and came to write and draw the following. Ice Age comics. That's a really impressive title page, really nice. So he talks about the history of the Earth, basically, starting from the beginning, and eventually, due to conditions, we had ice ages began. He claims that 4 times in the past, Earth has had ice ages. I don't know if that's scientific truth. I mean, how do we know? There could have been many ice ages before we knew how to track time back then, you know? After the 4th ice age, man became dominant. And we see man progress. Looks like some Aztecs. The conquistadors arrive. All they care about are golden land and slaves. Man waged war upon man ever more proficiently. And even now, wages war on nature. We're gobbling up all of Earth's resources. We're mass consumers and mass producers. And because of this, we're trapping all the heat into our atmosphere, turning Earth into a big greenhouse. So the ice pack in the Arctic is breaking up, which it's really happening now. You know, what is it, 50 years later now? Yeah, more than 50 years later. You know, he's talking about this back in 1973. So the sea levels are rising, but eventually that's going to lead to another ice age. Because it'll snow continually in the north. There'll be so much precipitation, and that'll turn into more glaciers. He wonders, and what of man? Will he and his work survive? And he wonders if maybe a new species will become dominant. And we see these bug creatures finding the detritus of Earth civilization. This guy's reading a copy of Slow Death that's all beat up. Definitely not in mint condition anymore. And he basically says that, if we want to avoid this fate, we need cooperation with friends and neighbors and stop waging war all the time. Getting back to nice, sustainable communities. Even thinks that maybe we'll have cities aloft with anti-gravity rays. But whatever we do, nature's going to go on, regardless. And once again, he poses the question, what's it going to be? Are we just going to take off and find another planet to despoil? Or can maybe our descendants will dwell in this beautiful garden world, roaming in tribes, following the sun and its seasons? Very doubtful. Sorry to be cynical, but it's got no chance of happening. This next one's The Cartoonist Dilemma. It's a little title here, True Confessions. This is one of those typical stories cartoonists always do, where they got to fill up some pages and they don't have any ideas, so they decide to write and draw about that. Having writer's block. Usually very annoying. And I mean, they almost always are annoying. And this is no better. Except I like the trick ending. So we see George Metzger, can't think of how to fill up these last 4 pages of the comic. Looks at his stove, looks at his outhouse, somehow hoping he's going to get some idea. He thinks about a dream he had about San Francisco being struck by an earthquake. He wonders if he should maybe do some exciting escapist adventure. Nope, there's not enough space left. He's only got like a page left. I wouldn't mind reading this comic though. That was pretty goofy and fun. Then he says, well, then all I can do is tell the truth. It's spring. The days are long and hot. Stay indoors and draw? It makes no sense. Time to be outdoors. Finish this page yourself. So I kind of like this meta ending. When I turned the page last night when I was reading this, I actually was like, what's up with this page? Sometimes negative space could be a really good design effect, but this is just looks like, wow, he didn't finish the page. And that's the gag. He's just like, I'm out of here. I don't give a shit about this 4th page. So kind of cute ending. And he writes adios at the bottom. So that's it, guys. Truckin, number 1 and number 2. George Metzger's pretty good title. I've said this before about Undergrounds is, obviously these stories aren't that great. I don't even think they're trying to be stories. It's just his musings, And, but I love Underground comics for this. They were just this real snapshot of the times. And when you think about it, almost we obviously all know what hippies are. We know exactly, everything about them. But it's all mostly fake. Most of what we know about hippies is from movies and TV. And maybe even mainstream comic books a little. And those are all filtered through this these older, richer men. You know what I mean? You got to get through them. So Undergrounds was the only time where real hippies were talking about their real life. And, for all I know, George Metzger was a total poser. I don't know. I don't think so. But it's so much different reading these comics about hippies than seeing the cartoon versions of them we saw in sitcoms from the late 60s and, movies using hippies as the butt of a joke, basically. I'm not even a big fan of the hippie culture. I just don't, I think I'm too much of a cynical prick. But it is really interesting getting this little sociological view of what their life was like back then. So there you have it, guys. Truckin 1 and 2. Hope you enjoyed watching it. And I hope to see you here next time at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.